Yeah. Oh, no, you
Ready? Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Lance Benonimi. I am the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Michigan Infrastructure and Transportation Association, or more commonly known as MITA. MITA represents over 500 companies across the state building our roads, bridges, underground water and sewers, utilities, and tunnels all throughout Michigan. MITA asked public sector consultants to examine the road funding crisis that Michigan currently faces. They have spent the past year compiling data that looks at the shortfall in Michigan's road funding gap. You will also hear from our speakers today why we need to take the findings of this report seriously, and as we confront the massive funding gap that exists for fixing Michigan's roads and bridges. Michigan is working hard to raise awareness on the issues facing Michigan's transportation funding while working towards finding a solution to ensure our roads are in good condition for generations to come. Now I'd like to introduce Maggie Pallone of Public Sector Consultants to discuss the findings of the report.
Thanks, Lance. Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie Pallone with Public Sector Consultants. PSC is a nonpartisan research and consulting firm based here in Lansing, Michigan. And we work with government agencies, nonprofit, and for-profit businesses to develop and implement public policy solutions to make Michigan a better place to live, work, and play. We have provided strategic counsel and thought leadership on the issue of transportation funding for the past decade, including staffing the 21st Century Infrastructure Commission. In 2022, as Lance said, we were asked by MITA to update the numbers from the infrastructure report. Our report today discusses the funding needs gap and potential solutions. The work in our report isn't rocket science. We're pointing out practical solutions to a long delayed problem that anyone who has been on four wheels in the past decade knows about. What the report being released today is a holistic look at the cost to build and maintain Michigan's transportation infrastructure, utilizing an asset management approach that extends the life of the road and limits the need for costly repairs to Michigan's roads. For this work, PSC developed a model to analyze how different maintenance approaches impact the cost to maintain the road over its design life. Our model accounts for all of Michigan's road network. That's the 85,000 federal aid roads, so think highways, major road networks, and the 170,000 plus lane miles of non-federal aid roads, think more local roadways and neighborhood roads. The model calculates the cost of maintaining Michigan's roads using four different scenarios, from a do-nothing approach to extending the road design life to 50 years. The first scenario is the do-nothing approach. Under this model, roads are built to their 20-year design life and no additional maintenance is applied to the road. While this model can produce short-term savings for road agencies, it is the costliest approach to maintaining our road network over the long term. The second scenario is a limited maintenance approach. Under this approach, the road design life is extended an additional 6 years through the application of sealants and crack repair, but no additional maintenance is conducted. The third scenario is an investment in a moderate maintenance approach that invests in both the preventative maintenance and a rehabilitative treatment over the road surface. This approach extends the life of the road by 22 years. The fourth scenario, and the scenario that PSC used to estimate funding needs, is to model an approach where the road design life is extended to 50 years, utilizing an approach to maintenance that does both appropriate preventative and rehabilitative maintenance to maximize the road network's years of use. This scenario is illustrated in the board in front of Lance. While these are not new or novel approaches, just last week, the County Road Association was in front of the legislature discussing the issue of lack of funding. PSC's findings were that Michigan's transportation system needs are much higher than previously estimated. Assuming the desire to maximize the design life of a road, PSC's model indicates an annual funding need of $9 billion. The model also demonstrates that investment in recommended maintenance and proper asset management planning and implementation can save Michiganders money. Spending money to maintain and rehabilitate a road is more cost-effective than waiting until a lane mile has reached its end of design life and reconstruction becomes the only option. The model confirms what Maida and others up here with me today have been saying for a decade, that short-term cost savings add up to significantly more long-term cost. Finally, PSC found that there's been a lack of funding that has not resulted in the state being able to do its proper asset management planning, resulting in Michigan's roads not being maintained to the recommended standard. It will cost more to bring the roads up to the 90% good or fair goal that MDOT and the County Road Association have established for our road network. To achieve the goals of the Michigan legislature and MDOT to fully utilize an asset management approach that properly maintains our road, PSC has modeled a funding gap of approximately $3.9 billion per year. This funding shortfall does include the recent injections of funding from both the federal government and Rebuild Michigan Plan, the governor's state bonding program. This funding gap represents an annual cost to Michiganders of $535. Utilizing that gap number of $3.9 billion, PSC then explored 5 different options that could potentially raise revenue for roads. PSC was not asked to endorse a particular solution. Instead, we were asked to identify implementable ideas for policymakers to consider and then the cost to maintain. Option 1 is to increase the motor fuels tax. To fill the gap, the motor fuel tax would need to be raised an additional 74 cents. Option 2 would allow for the motor fuel tax to be assessed on a per dollar instead of per gallon basis. While the fuel tax would still need to be increased in times of high gas prices, the state would benefit from additional revenue. The opposite would obviously be true when gas prices are low. Option 3 is an increase to the sales tax, with the increase being dedicated to transportation funding. The sales tax would need to be increased by 3 percentage points to fill the gap. Option 4 would allow for local governments to pursue a local sales tax. As highlighted in the report, many other states allow for local sales taxes to be collected to fund their transportation network. Option 5 is to move to a vehicle mile traveled, commonly called a VMT fee. This approach would allow for a fee to be assessed on a per mile basis and could be remitted through a number of different approaches, as highlighted in the report. We discussed a GPS mileage fee, a pay at the pump model, plug-in devices without GPS, an odometer with a manual reporting, or a prepaid manual mileage fee. To fill the funding gap, drivers would need to pay approximately between 3 and 5 cents per mile traveled. Currently, 16 states and 2 multi-state coalitions have developed pilots to explore implementing a VMT. I recognize that our model puts forward a number that is a much larger investment than previous reports, but that shouldn't surprise you. Our road system is aging and it needs work. In 2021, just 67% of our roads were in good or fair condition. And MDOT is forecasting that by 2033, just 52% will be in good or fair condition, a drop of 17%, even with additional federal and state resources. As long as we continue to have a lack of funding to do proper maintenance, road fixes that would have cost $100,000 or $300,000 today will cost $3 million in just a few years to rebuild. Our report just puts a price tag on what lack of proper road funding has added to the cost to maintain and operate Michigan's transportation network. With that, I will now turn it over to Jim Holcomb, President and CEO of the Michigan Chamber.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everyone. I am Jim Holcomb. I'm the President and CEO of the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. We represent thousands of businesses across the state, employing over 1 million Michigan workers. Our members are in all 83 counties, and they represent and operate in every industry imaginable. They've made it clear to us at the chamber that improving our infrastructure is a priority. It's a priority not only for them individually, but for the Michigan Chamber as an organization. Michigan's economic prosperity, our competitiveness in the global marketplace, and quality of life for our citizens is dependent upon modernizing and improving our infrastructure. The report that Maggie just discussed by PSC is reaffirming what we've known for many years. The depth of the problem is large, but the cost of doing nothing is even higher. We have to take action now. The time for action is now. We need to put politics aside. We need to move past elections, and we need to now work collaboratively to find a pragmatic approach that will once and for all put us on a path to improving our infrastructure. The Michigan Chamber, we look forward to working with anyone who is serious about this problem, anyone who is committed to finally moving forward in a pragmatic way, anyone who is committed to putting Michigan first, to putting our citizens first, to putting our businesses first, and finally making real progress with real solutions. At this time, I'll turn it over to Ed Noyola.
Good morning. My name is Ed Noyola. I am the Chief Deputy Legislative Director for the County Road Association of Michigan. Thank you for having me. CRA represents all 83 county road agencies in the state of Michigan. We exist by statute to maintain and improve a safe and efficient road system for the motoring public. We have jurisdiction for over 75% of Michigan's road system. That equates to 90,000 miles of roads that we have and over 5,000 bridges. Managing the local network is a challenge enough without the freeze-thaw cycles that we have every year and the months of snow and ice that we have to push around for the entire winter. This is putting a huge pressure on us, not only to maintain, but also improve our infrastructure. The annual march continues to take a significant toll on the local infrastructure. As the PSC report shows, Michigan is faced with a funding crisis. We have discussed this for decades, literally decades, in Lansing. The situation is not going to, if the situation isn't addressed, this is only going to get worse, and it's going to cost more. Funding and fixing the road and bridge is a bipartisan issue. It impacts all 83 Senate districts, or excuse me, 38 Senate districts, all 110 Senate House districts, and all 83 counties. We need the leadership to work together and tackle this issue head on. As the report shows, inaction will not make the problem any less expensive. CRA is proud to be part of the effort to help bridge, no pun intended, the funding gap and finally get Michigan's roads in a condition that we so desperately need. Thank you, John Lamacchia.
Thanks, Ed. Good morning. I'm John Lamacchia with the Michigan Municipal League. I'm our Director of State and Federal Affairs and have been working on transportation issues for nearly a decade at the League. Our cities and villages know firsthand the negative impact of underfunding our transportation network has had on our local budgets, our residents, and our businesses. Much of the funding increases that the state has experienced over the last few years as a result of the governor's bonding program and the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has not touched local roads and neighborhood streets. The simple fact is today we have a funding problem, and now is the time to address it. This report makes it clear that the funding gap in Michigan and the funding gap that we face is only going to get worse if we elect to do nothing, and big change is needed now. As vehicles become more fuel efficient, as hybrids become more popular, and as electric vehicles become a significant part of every major auto manufacturer's future, the current way the state generates revenue for the Michigan Transportation Fund is not sustainable. Our current funding models, which rely exclusively or almost exclusively on registration fees and state fuel taxes, is not enough to keep Michigan's roads and bridges in good condition. We need to develop an equitable transportation funding solution that recognizes the future of Michigan's infrastructure network, encourages and embraces changing technology, and incorporates mobility options from the bus to the bike. We look forward to working with our partners here today, the administration, and legislative leaders to develop a way forward to solve this funding crisis that we are currently facing. With that, I'll turn it over to Brad Williams.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Brad Williams. I'm the Vice President of Government Relations at the Detroit Regional Chamber. And I've been working on this issue on behalf of the Chamber for quite some time. And I think most of the people that you've already heard from today have been part of almost all of those conversations. And I think most of the folks here remember, roughly 20 years ago when Governor Granholm was going to solve this problem with a 9-cent gas tax increase. And the cost of inaction is now that it's a 74-cent problem. Because we didn't do that, it was about 10 years later that Governor Snyder proposed a 1-cent sales tax increase. And the cost of inaction now has put us to a 3-cent sales tax increase. So the cost of inaction is not just imagined here, it's real. The Chamber has been working on this issue, not just in the 15 years or so that I've been here, but since the beginning in 1903. In fact, as I was looking through some stuff this week, I found a report the Chamber commissioned in 1905 from some urban planners. And before going into the failures and the inadequacies of Detroit's street system, they said this will cost something. Nothing good doesn't cost. This report shows that we have an enormous funding gap just simply to maintain the roads we have, not even to build the roads of the future. So it's time, it's beyond time to get back on track. If we don't do something soon, these costs are only going to go through the roof. What is a 3-cent sales tax option today? Maybe a 5-cent sales tax option if we don't act. We already have seen what happens when we fail to act. This has increased by $1.5 billion just in the past decade. This is not a responsible use of the people's property. Having good roads not only helps our residents reduce car repair bills, but it attracts businesses to our state. It's an economic development issue, and no one wants to deal with an unreliable transportation network, but this is going to cost something. Nothing good doesn't cost something. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Rob Coppersmith from MIDA.
Well said, Brian. Thank you. Again, I'm Rob Coppersmith, the Executive Vice President of the Michigan Infrastructure and Transportation Association, MIDA. The report makes it crystal clear that it's time to take funding our infrastructure seriously. Michigan has more than 120,000 miles of paved roadway, and the cost to keep these roads in good condition is significant. Over the past decade alone, we've seen the annual funding gap to maintain Michigan roads and bridges increase to $3.9 billion. The need for funding will only continue to increase in coming years. As of last year, more than 42% of Michigan lane miles were rated in poor condition. If we continue down the path we're on, we'll see that number increase to nearly 50% by 2031. The problem we're facing today is not just a funding issue. It's a quality of life issue. Are we willing to settle for roads and bridges that are in poor condition, that our family use daily to get to school, work, and home? Each year, our inadequate roads cost the average household more than $4,800 annually due to driving on roads in poor condition, the unreliability of Michigan's transportation network, and in the form of traffic crashes. Among other factors, our failing infrastructure is estimated that these costs for Michigan households will only increase to more than $6,200 by 2031. Michigan residents deserve a reliable infrastructure network, and Michigan leaders have the opportunity now to address this funding crisis head on. No more kicking the can down the road. Funding short-term road fixes by crisis can no longer be the way we fix our roads and keep them safe. This report makes it clear that Michigan needs an equitable, long-term, sustainable funding plan that will finally dedicate the resources to improve our roads and bridges. The data speaks for itself. Michigan faces an annual funding shortfall of $3.9 billion, and that is even with the funding from the governor's bonding program and the federal IIJA program. There will be a day coming in the not too distant future when those funds will dry up but our need will only continue to grow. Michigan need is clear. We need to enact an equitable, long-term, sustainable funding plan that will finally dedicate the resources to improve our roads and bridges. In the coming days, I look forward to launching the Fix My State Coalition with our industry partners and those who advocate for making Michigan a better place to help finally bring an end to our funding crisis. We look forward to working with the governor and the Michigan legislative leaders to finally get a solution in place that works for all of Michigan and fixes the damn roads. Thank you all again for coming today, and to our great speakers, and especially the Michigan Chamber for hosting this morning. I'd now like to open it up for questions.
Do any of the chamber folks want to say what their favorite option is?
At this point, we don't have a favorite option. I don't have guidance from our members what the preferred plan will be, but I think what we need to do is make sure that we're holding our elected leaders accountable, not for at this point an outcome, but for undertaking the process to identifying the pragmatic problem solving outcome. We need to make sure that our leaders realize that, as Brad said, and what the data has shown, what Maggie shows, something good costs, and we have to be willing to undertake that. And people have to come to it with an open mind and actually listen with each other. We need to stop the political rhetoric. And I think one problem could be you put out 1 point today and all that does is get nitpicked to death, and then the whole process stops. We need to have a full, open, transparent process, committee hearings, and listen to what our legislators, leaders want to propose, and we'll work cooperatively with anyone who wants to solve this problem once and for all.
Yeah, and I would just chime in and agree with most of everything that Jim said and say, you know, we're probably at a point where there's not a silver bullet solution here, right? I don't think, you know, if 45 cent gas tax increase 4 years ago was unpalatable, I can't imagine a 74-cent gas tax increase is going to be any more palatable. So we're probably at the point where we have to find a mix of solutions to actually solve this problem. And you know, the way we move about this state and this country is changing too, and we also have to keep that in mind as we're building a solution.
So in January, the state estimated $9 billion surplus. The governor today is signing a tax cut. Do you feel like there's a little bit of a flash on messaging about whether the state has funding for something like this? I mean, residents are hearing that there is surplus money. They're hearing that there's enough incoming revenue that it possibly do tax cut, and then here you're proposing tax increase essentially.
I mean, I think it's important to note too that the surplus we have is mostly one-time revenue at this point, and what we're talking about is something that can't be solved with a one-time infusion of cash. Maggie said we need $3.9 billion more every year. If we spent all of our surplus on it, that would get us, you know, into what, 2025, and then we'd be out of money, and then we'd be talking about what the solution was at that point. So it's better now to have this conversation on the front end while the state has resources at its disposal to help plug some holes in the meantime. But this has to happen as soon as possible.
I don't think it's ill-advised. What we're asking for is to look at the total policy. What we need is a systemic change in how we fund road funding going forward. We're in the problem we are now because we haven't invested for decades. As Brad said, this isn't a one-time fix. It can't be solved with Band-Aid. What we're looking for is how are we going to pay for roads not for the next 2, 3, 5 years, the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And we need to look at that now. You know, we've discussed here, there's a lot of changing to how people are moving around. The technology is changing. And we need to have a system that adapts to the future, and we need to have that conversation now. So I don't think it's not a one-to-one trade-off, a tax cut here for a tax increase there. There's so much money that we spend in the state, but it needs to be spent efficiently, wisely, so taxpayer dollars are used up again.
All of this information, does this include local roads? And if so, what are the local municipalities and counties doing to raise their share of the money as well?
Yeah,
If you could go to the microphone.
Great. Ed Noel at County Road Agency. Yeah, we are concerned. We are working with this group. We've also looked at an electric vehicle study that we produced or had produced for us by the Anderson Group. So we're looking at those options and even some other options. The one thing we are looking at, the townships and the counties are providing additional revenue for additional maintenance and special projects through their millages and through their special assessment authority. So locally, yeah, they're putting money into the program. So that's what I can say for the counties.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So on the local side, we have 533 members with 533 individual road agencies. At the local level, we are very limited in our ability to raise funds. Property taxes tend to be the main model for that. There are 24 communities that have a local income tax. But what a 1 mil property tax raises in one community is not equal to what another community may be able to raise. So while we've stepped up and done a lot of things at the local level, and typically millages pass, it's not the only option that's available in which is going to solve that problem. So for us to be able to work with this group and collectively with the administration to find something that's actually going to get to and address local streets and neighborhood streets is going to be critically important. I would also suggest too that, we're talking about one of the issues that we have here. So as the state collectively looks at their budget, we still need to make sure we are investing in things like housing, economic development, and a variety of other things that are going to make us competitive. This is one component of that.
What are you guys doing to lobby the legislature to actually get some of that IIJ funding to come to local municipalities?
Yeah, so there is no question. We have conversations. Ed just testified the other day in Senate subcommittee on transportation. So did I. We've made presentations to a variety of committees on this. We as an organization have set up an individual program to help try to drive and provide technical assistance to our members to get them access to those resources. And I think that's one of the key components here. But again, that is a 5-year federal program that has a life cycle to it. We're talking about state resources in this case that can make its way more to the local level. And when we look at federal funds, primarily most of them, or 75% of them, go to federal aid eligible roads. Many of our local streets, at least in the city village level, are not federal aid eligible. And that is those neighborhood streets, which is the very first street many of our constituents see on day one.
I'd like to point out one other issue on the IIJA money. That is by law restricted. 75% of that money goes to the Department of Transportation, and 25% is available for federal aid local roads. So in our system, only 30% of our 90,000 miles of road are federal aid eligible. And back to the other point, I wanted to also state that county road commissions have no taxing authority. We rely on locals to make those decisions and pass millages on their own.
Invested $1.6 billion in electric vehicle incentives battery plans in the last 3 weeks or something. Is that short-sighted with no plan to generate road revenue from electric vehicles and also no roads to support those trips or poor quality roads?
So what I would say about that is that we're open to new technologies, and this is why we're pulling this group together. We want to anticipate all sorts of new technologies that might be driving on our roads, whether it be hydrogen or other technologies that come out in the future. And rather than reinvent the wheel every time a new technology comes out, we should come up with a sustainable solution that will work well into the future.
So out of the solutions you're proposing, the fuel tax increase doesn't account for any of those, but the sales tax and the vehicle mile travel would, right?
That would be one option. I think Brian's right when he's talked about there's no silver bullet on this. I think it's going to be a combination of a lot of things to get us to such a grand number. And remember, this number only represents taking care of what we currently have. It anticipates no growth. It anticipates no off-ramps to other communities that would love them. Safety features that could be built into our roads. This is just to maintain what we currently have.
So earlier this year, there was a state commission study released looking at tolls as a possibility on the roads. Is that something that you all looked at in order to?
Well, as we form the coalition, we'll definitely be looking at HNTB's tolling study. There are 3 phases to that study. In simple numbers, the first phase of tolling could generate $1.4 billion in revenue is what the report shows. I just think that we got to put all the cards on the table and find out what's palatable to the people of the state of Michigan, the legislature, and the business community.
Let's jump to a few online questions real quick.
Yeah. The first question is from Dave Eggert with Cranes. It's for Maggie and PSC. Can you explain more why your estimated funding gap is different from the MDOT and CRA estimate?
Yeah, great question. So our number maybe is the first report that looks at what it costs to actually maintain the entire asset across its 50-year life. Most of the reports that have come out over the last decade look at a funding, more short-term funding solutions, either over a decade or 2. Ours looks at the cost to maintain a road through a 50-year lifespan.
And then another question from Kaden Mines with GB6 in the Peninsula. What will funding look like for the UP or rural areas?
I would hope that funding would look like a blanket approach for the state of Michigan. So we wouldn't want to segregate areas and say the needs are different. You know, we have an interstate system that needs to be maintained, and county and local roads that all need to be addressed. So we would hopefully come up with a model that would just work for the entire state.
I know this would be a pretty big ask, but is the County Road Association also lobbying to be able to have that taxing authority? I know you mentioned you don't have that, but you know, I know, like I said, it's a pretty big ask for this. It's a big problem.
It's a huge ask. Constitutionally, we are not part of the recognized, so to speak, units of government. So I don't see that coming up in the future, but it's a nice thought.
Any other questions?
How do you translate this report into action? I've over the years, I've seen a lot of presentations very similar to this. What's your plan to just sort of get this in front of the legislature and make it the big thing?
Go ahead, Lance. So I think this is just a start to a long campaign towards working towards an equitable long-term funding solution. If you've looked at the past sort of funding initiatives that have occurred, you can see a report that comes out, and then you see some attention get done by the legislature. And, you know, we're hopeful that there can be some sort of collaborative effort between both House and Senate, both parties and the governor's office, to whether it's a commission or a task force. We've seen a lot of success with those, and I think right now this is just the first stage of that.
What is the major driver behind the steep increase in the amount of money that's needed for them?
Yeah, great question. So I think 3 things really drive it. The first being that even though we have had an influx of money over the past decade, we most certainly haven't enough. So I hate to maybe use this term, but we flattened the curve somewhat, right, in terms of the steep drop that we expected to see with the additional influx of federal and state dollars, but it wasn't enough. So fixes that might have cost, you know, like I said, 100 or 300,000 are all of a sudden costing 3 million because you have to rebuild that road, and there's just not enough money left over to do the maintenance. So we're just having more and more roads each year become in worse and worse condition. The second thing is our road system is aging, right? Like our highway system was built 50 years ago, and now it's come due. It's time to start paying for those investments. And that's the other thing. I will say the third thing is inflation. And in our report, although these numbers that we talked about today don't include inflation, the cost to rebuild a road or the cost to do any work on these roads is increasing at a significant pace, even without the record high inflation that we've seen over the last year.
But I mean, at a certain point, it's just going to level off, because it's not going to continue to increase, because the amount of money that is needed to fix the roads is only the amount of money that we need to be rebuilt. So how much would that be?
Yeah, right. So it's just math, right? We look in our report, we look at it and we say that it costs to build a road and maintain it over 50 years. If it's a non-federal road, it's around $570,000. To maintain and build a federal road, it's around 4.3 million. So you just do that math, right? Over 50 years and you can annualize that cost. So we have hopefully given a number that actually provides what it will cost, to your point, over per lane mile, over the life of a road, over the life of maintaining that asset. But it's an asset, right? Over maintaining that asset.
Sorry if this is a little repetitive, but can you clarify why you guys are looking at 50-year funding, like a 50-year road life versus what FF usually looking at? And then also just to clarify, this would be all roads in Michigan, this estimate, or is it only certain, like, do you cut off that local roads?
Nope, it's all roads. And I think Lance is going to answer the question around 50 years.
So back in the 2015 road funding package, the legislature passed within that package $100 million lockbox and put together, I forget the task force name, but it required the department to begin to start building 50-year roads. And so there were 2 pilot projects that they used for that. And they're ongoing. We won't know the exact results until 50 years, but they're along that capital preventative maintenance cycle that the report shows right down there in the end to get to that 50-year road. So it's really what the legislature has asked us to do, and the department.
I think we have some more online.
Yep, another online question from Dave Nicholas with WCMU. Past studies have looked at composition of road materials. Have we come to the best formula of materials to build the roads, or can such a formula be put into this name?
We use federal specifications across Michigan on all of our federal roads, and we use similar specifications on the state roads as well. And that's nationwide. We're using the same standards, same materials that they're using in Illinois, Ohio, Wisconsin, Indiana, or all of our bordering states.
Any other questions?
Brian?
Brad, sorry.
Yeah.
I gave you a new name.